On this episode of Watch Brad Work, we're going to be talking about the biggest project by far on this property. It spans several years and is still not completely finished. We purchased this land in 2021 specifically to pursue whitetail deer. It met our criteria in several ways. First, it had to be within our price range. Next, it needed to be within a reasonable driving distance of our home. After that, I was looking for a desired woods to field ratio of 70% to 30%. We didn't want to be farmers, nor did we want to have to cash rent the land or enroll in CRP just to help us make payments on this land. And lastly, good access would be a bonus. So this property has a seasonal creek flowing through the middle of the entire property. It is typically walkable even in areas where there is standing water. It also provides a visual barrier and a greater likelihood of scent dispersion. All these factors made for ideal access to hunting locations, often to tree stands we have right off of the creek. So right now I'm standing in the bed of the creek. There are pools of water scattered throughout the length of the creek, but there's really no flowing water right now. Due to the hilly terrain and the volume of water that can fall during a heavy rainstorm, this non-flowing creek can turn into a raging river in a matter of moments. Water is powerful. You can see evidence from past high volume water events with some of these sheer drop-offs based on the amount of water that came down this creek bed. From an access to tree stand perspective, these steep banks add additional visual barriers from the deer up above. However, from a property access perspective, reaching the east side of the creek with even the smallest equipment is extremely difficult, if not practically impossible. So the best solution would be a bridge. But honestly, the span and equipment cost were not realistic. Now, a Missouri crossing was a much more realistic option, but I didn't want to be limited on the kinds of equipment I could get across the creek. The solution was a low water crossing, where I would be embedding culverts into concrete that would handle the typical creek flow, but the water could go over the concrete during the limited high volume water flow events. So for the remainder of the video, we're going to be switching formats a bit. And I'm doing that because when I started this project, I didn't have the equipment that I currently have today, and I honestly didn't have the time to stop frequently in order to capture all the different phases of this project. However, I did get some pictures and a couple videos, and the best way to show you what I did is through a slideshow. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, before we jump into this slide deck, I wanted to point out that this is not a step-by-step how to make a low water crossing at your property. It is merely documenting the processes I went through to put in a low water crossing at our property. Now that doesn't mean you can't learn something from it or maybe get some ideas, but I wanted to make sure we're clear on that before we got into the slideshow. All right, this first picture that we're looking at is a typical flow after a decent to heavy rain event. It isn't taken right after the rain stop because it's typically going to be a lot higher than this for a brief time, and it gets back to this point. One of the things that I was able to do, though, was get up above where this creek is at, and this is one of the videos that I do have for you here, taken on my phone, of course, and the creek doesn't look too bad there, kind of a nice little babbling brook, but I want to stop it there for a minute and go back. Did you notice all this vegetation right here that's knocked over? And the reason it's knocked over is because the water got up that high at one point. And you can't really tell the scale right here, but this is where the top of the bank is at. So for the water to get up that high is pretty significant. Even though it doesn't look bad right now, it clearly was pretty high at one point. The other thing, I stopped it again. Remember those banks we were talking about, those pretty sharp drop-offs? And that's because where the creek bends, the water slams into that and the erosion is pretty significant. So it is something that, it is important to be aware of all the things that are going into this process. All right, so this is an overview of a section of the property where the creek is going through, where I wanted to put in the low water crossing. Just real quick, see where this bend is right here? We talked about that in the previous slide. This is where you're gonna find those sheer drop-offs, because as the water's flowing down, it's gonna hammer into this. And the same thing over here, it's gonna make this very, very steep and very, very sharp. So what I ended up doing was going a little bit before that, and this is where I determined my low water crossing was going to be going. Now, it is still relatively steep, but nothing like that sheer drop-off. I want you to pay attention to these two trees right here, because in the next slide, we're looking at it from the opposite way. This is on the west side of the creek. Here are those two trees right here, and that's where I started my excavation. I used my tractor and my bucket, and I just started pulling the dirt out of that. Now, our next slide is on the east side of the creek. Here's my tractor, and I took a weed whacker and cleared all the weeds and all the brush and make sure I had that cleared out of there. You can kind of see the edge of the bank where it kind of dropped off. Here's the creek bed. Now, I did not drive the tractor across this to get there. I actually had to use access from my neighbor. Our neighbor previously owned this property, and they parceled it off for us, and they allowed us to go over their property while we were making this this whole project. Now, this is the same location that the tractor we just saw here, just looking back towards the west side that I'd already excavated, and you can kind of see from a different perspective what I had already done. Now, this is after I had excavated the east side. All right, so I have completely excavated both sides, and you can kind of tell right here, but I pushed the dirt, some of it at least, down into the creek bed. The creek bed was dry as a bone at this point. We've been suffering through a drought. This was in the summer of 2022, so wanted to make that a point as well. But I had pushed the dirt down in here, and this next video is another video that I have. It's a significant one, because this is the first time that I took the tractor across the entirety of the creek. So you can kind of see there I pushed the dirt down in here, and the creek's beds on both sides here. No water's flowing at this point. I did want to point out real quick too, you'll notice it's just my tire tracks that are in the dirt. It's dry dirt, dry as can be. This does not work real well when it gets wet, but for the time being, I was able to get across. Again, apologize for some of the movement there. Just using my cell phone to capture this. So just wanted to show you my very first time. Was a pretty significant event, getting across the creek at that point. So that was pretty cool. All right, so as we go to the next slide, we've actually jumped forward a year. So the last video you saw was at the end of the summer in 2022. I stopped. I got all my equipment off the land because I was going to be bow hunting, and it was good enough for me to use it for that year. This is the following spring, so this is 2023. You'll notice that I have that's a 2x6 board that I used. We had enough rain that it had kind of washed away the dirt that I had in the middle there, so I wasn't creating a dam or anything, but I think I put that there because I must have been turkey hunting, wanted to get to the east side of the creek. Another thing I wanted to show you real quick while I had this slide up was I have a water pump. That water pump, I was pumping some water out of the creek because I had some water containers that I was capturing some water for irrigation for later in the summer when I figured it would dry up again. I had some seedlings that I was planting, some trees, and I wanted to make sure I had some water, but we're gonna revisit that in just a little bit here. All right, so we're jumping ahead here where I'm actually starting to do the excavation for my footprint for the low water crossing slab. All right, so as you're looking at this, I have already excavated by hand with a shovel. I had several people that were giving me a hard time about that. I did not use a excavator. This is with a regular shovel. And I started getting my footprint here where I was going to put my forms for my concrete. My goal was to get about 6 inches down below the creek creek bed on both sides. You can see this is the level of the creek bed. I wanted to get 6 inches below where I was going to put in I'm going to compact some gravel. And I wanted to zoom in here because you'll notice I have some water that's starting to seep in here. That's going to be a significant thing later. Now, even though we are dry as can be, we've had a little rain here and there, nothing significant for any creek flow water. But as soon as I got down far enough, I had to go far enough into the bank. When it'll go back here, it looks the same on the other side, but I was starting to go into the approach so that I could get it enough room for my forms. We're going to take a look at that. All right, so this is just another perspective here. You can see where I had dug that in here, and this is the approach coming down. You can see what I did on the other side as well there. Now we're going to take a pretty significant jump forward here. This is a look inside of where I was going to be putting my my form. Now, before I talk about what's happening right here, I wanted to talk about my culverts here. And essentially what I have, these are 18-inch culverts, and they're corrugated dual wall solid plain end culvert drainage pipe. That's what it is. I got it at a big box store. I got 20 feet of length because that's what they came in, and I essentially cut that right in half so that I have two 10-foot sections of 18-inch culvert, and that's what's sitting right there. What's going on here is my intention was, in addition to going down to put a base of gravel, I was going to put a 12-inch pylon here of concrete that my culverts were going to sit on to give them extra strength. All right, I had a round form that I was going to pour my concrete in here and set that on top of that. Well, I got down about 4 inches and the water started flowing in. This is mostly a sandy base, and the subsoil moisture started filling in, so that was not going to work. Now, I know some of you that have worked with concrete will say, hey, put that form in there. You could put the concrete will displace the water, and you'll get your concrete form in there. That's all well and good, but problem I was having was, as I was digging deeper, not only was I getting more water, but all this side was collapsing. So it was gonna be a nightmare, and I just kind of abandoned that idea. So after thinking about it a little longer, I decided to do this. And so instead of having 3 concrete pylons here to set this upon, I decided to excavate the whole entire area where the culverts were going to be sitting, and I was going to go down 12 inches and fill it in with more of the gravel I was going to compact and essentially get that base that I was looking at. And did I need to do that? I don't know, but it really felt like it would be a good thing to do. Problem was I kept getting that water that was filling in there. So here's my pump again. What I did was I got my my hose in there and I pumped it out, sent it down the creek, and I kept digging until I got down to about 12 inches or so. Yes, the water kept filling in over and over again, but as soon as I got down to where I needed to, I put my gravel in and it displaced that water, and we were good to go. Now, again, as I mentioned, I did not capture every little bit, so we're going to take a pretty significant jump forward here. And this is where I started getting excited because I had my form in, and real quick, my size here is I wanted 10 feet wide, so that I had plenty of room to take any equipment I wanted over. And then 8 feet. 8 feet is what I wanted to span across the creek. And then 24 inches height. Okay, that was my goal. All right, so what you're seeing here is my gravel base. I have it 6 inches along the sides, along most of it, and then 12 inches in the middle. All right, that my culverts are setting down. The other thing a couple other things that I wanted to highlight here was that I put some stakes around my forms, and that is because if I were to have a cement truck come in, which there's no way that I could, but if I was going to do that and they just started loading all that concrete in here, there was a lot of potential for that concrete to push my form out. And I don't know if I needed this or not because I was just putting in a little bit at a time because I was doing it manually, but I just did that anyway. The other thing is what you're seeing here, these metal rods, those are rebar. So for those that don't work with concrete, rebar is used in a lot of concrete applications. It's used for strength and also because it expands and contracts at the same rate that concrete does when it heats up, cools down, and so it just adds a lot more strength to that concrete. What I did too is I took these rods and I really drilled them down into the ground to give a little bit more stability as well, and it allowed me to lock in where my culverts were going to go as well. This is just another view. I'm a little bit farther down where I'm kind of tying in some more of these rebar rods. And once again, this is looking upstream. This is looking the lengthwise of what I was working on. So you can kind of see from different perspectives what I was working on and kind of how I was setting this up. All right, so now I'm ready to put that concrete in. What I'm showing you right now is one of 2 loads of all the concrete that I had to get ready to put in my form. I roughly calculated that I would need 260 bags of 60-pound concrete mix to make this happen. So this is half of that right here. And you'll notice real quick that the pallets that I have here are the maximum amount that I felt that I could safely take back over the river and through the woods, literally on my tractor with my forks. And I did that. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 here. Plus I had more. So I believe, after all was said and done, I probably had at least 8 or 9 pallets back there. So I just wanted to kind of give some example of what I was working on here. All right, so this is my setup. I did not mix this entirely by hand. What you're seeing here is my my mixer that I got from Harbor Freight. Off to the side here, I have a generator to power it. And then, of course, my tractor, I'm utilizing the bucket. Over here is I think it's a 310-gallon IBC tote used in a lot of applications. I have a buddy that can get it to me as many as I want. So big shout out to him. So I had this full of water. I transport water in a bucket, and I would mix in here. Same setup here, just a different perspective here. I discovered that I could get 3 total bags in my mixer. So water bag, water bag, water bag. I get it mixed all up, and then I take this lever and I dump it into my tractor bucket. All right. I did figure out that I could do 3 loads and dump those into this bucket to maximize or minimize the number of trips I was taking down the hill into my form. So if you do the math, I can get 9 bags mixed concrete into every load going down the hill. All right, so again, I told you we're fast forwarding through the process, but this is what I've gotten pretty far through, and essentially dumping a bucket load into my form here. I'd use a shovel and a 2x4 section to smooth it out the best I could, and I just kept doing that. I literally took an entire day, and boy, it was brutal. Not as brutal as mixing it by hand, but it was a lot of work. Again, fast forwarding in time here, I'm getting closer. You'll notice here as I'm getting farther down my dirt approach, I'm starting to break up the dirt here because I'm trying to get as far as I can to minimize how much I had to move by hand. Yeah, so this is getting closer and closer to getting the entire thing done. Now, this was done in the middle of summer. This is 2023, middle of summer, south central Iowa, and it doesn't get totally dark until 9:30, almost 10 o'clock, and I guarantee you it was past then. These are the lights for my tractor, and it's pretty much done here. I took my rake and I kind of raked across here to give it some, give it a little bit of texture. We don't want it flat. This isn't a sidewalk. When it gets wet, I don't want it to be slip sliding off this thing when it gets wet, and so that's why I did that. The other thing, if you're paying any attention here, you'll notice I did not totally fill this up. I ran out of my concrete. All right, it was a rough estimating what I needed. I wasn't running back to the big box store so that I could get this 100% full at 24 inches. All I cared about was that I could get across to the other side. So again, no one was going to be giving me a permit to make sure that I had it exactly at 24 inches. But yeah, I just wanted to let you know that's what I was doing. All right, so I'm showing you this real quick because let me back up again. You got to let this thing cure, and I couldn't take the forms off right away. And while it was curing, of course, there was going to be rain in the forecast. So instead of creating a dam and really messing up, I can't imagine if I had a big water flow and then wiped everything out while I was still curing, I cut a hole in my form so that if water accumulated, it could go through. I did that on both sides. And wouldn't you know it, it did happen. So we are actually gone for 2 weeks, or not 2 weeks, about a week up at our Door County property. So it gave us a chance to let this cure. But by the time I was able to pull the form off of this, we'd actually had 2 rainfalls. Thankfully, nothing too severe, but enough that we obviously had some water going through there. So I'm glad I did that. And so you can kind of see that it's actually working, doing exactly what I wanted. However, this next picture, you're going to see basically how treacherous it can get when the rain turns that previously dry approach into mud. You can pretty much see my footsteps. Oh, that's not going to work. These are my forms that I took out. I think I was putting my wheelbarrow so I can get down there to get some of my tools and whatnot out of there. But it's just a good example of what could happen as soon as we start having rain. Now, the good news was I wasn't having any issues directing the water through my culverts underneath the low water crossing, but this is all the rain creating mud and coming into this is the little section that I had excavated so that I could get my forms out of here. So I had to think about what I was going to do. That was just a muddy mess, and I didn't want to compromise anything getting underneath my forms. So here's my solution. This is essentially a French drain. A French drain, and this is kind of preformed. It's a 4-inch piece of culvert that was perforated, surrounded by, I'm going to call them packing peanuts because that's what they basically were, except they are more solid than that, and then covered in fabric so that as water pours into here, it filters through that. I had it connected to a solid piece of 4-inch culvert dumping into my creek bed, all right? And so I had this a base of gravel. I put gravel over the top of that so that I can drive back and forth across it and hopefully wouldn't compromise and get the water underneath the low water crossing. All right, so here's a picture of the completed low water crossing. You can kind of see on this side I filled in the gravel on both sides where I had the French drain. And this next slide, I want to jump the same picture, but I want to look a little bit closer here. So because I had to cut that culvert in half, I did not have what's called a bell or fluted end that would direct the water into the culvert. So I actually took a couple flat stones and I put them at an angle and concreted them in to direct the water on both sides here. I'm putting in riprap. They're just pieces of concrete or rock that is going to both protect the bank and direct water into these culverts to keep that water flowing and not create a dam. This is just looking the other direction downstream. You'll notice that I have a little bit more covered here for my my culverts coming out for the French drain, and eventually the plan it was to get this covered in rock, so it looked pretty natural. You'll notice I put some more gravel down here and compacted. I actually ended up putting a thin layer of concrete as well so that it wasn't causing any more erosion as that water is pouring in here. So this is pretty cool as well. This is like before when I went over the low water crossing. This is a video again on my cell phone. The first time that I went across with any of the gear that I needed on the other side. So I have a pretty significant, about a 2-acre food plot that I have over there, and all this, all that I have in my bucket here. I was about ready to spray the weeds prior to putting in the seed for my food plot. And it was such an exciting time because here I am going across my low water crossing, poorly capturing it on video. I get it, but you understand and can get that. I was pretty excited as I am for the first time getting across the other side of the creek with my tractor. Pretty cool event there. All right, so this is later in 2023. I'm assuming, I don't remember, but I'm assuming this is in fall. You can tell there's not a lot of green vegetation anymore. It could have even been as I was heading out to one of my tree stands here, going out bow hunting, but you can see that everything's looking great. I have, here's where I put in that gravel to bridge the gap. Here is dumping out any water that's going in there. And the last slide that I have here is pretty awesome. And the reason I'm just going to get my face out of here, but so this is the buck that I shot in the fall of 2023, and I shot him on the east side of the creek and the property, and it's a manual deer cart that I had, and I had no problem getting him across the creek. So this was a big project. I got it done, but man, it took a lot of work, but I did it. I got it done, and it did exactly what I was hoping to do.
Demographic. Super duper, gang. Yeah! Super duper. That's nice. Way to go. Neato, gang. Yes.
Well, I really wish I could say that I was 100% done with this low water crossing project. But do you remember those high creek walls earlier in the video? Yeah, those high creek walls. The ongoing drought we've been experiencing, I think, really lulled me into a false sense of security. Then this happened. Okay, well, it wasn't that bad, but in the spring of 2024, we definitely came out of our drought we were in. In our next episode, you'll see what I discovered, what I learned, and what I needed to change on our low water crossing after a heavy rain event. Well, thanks so much for stopping by today. I look forward to seeing you the next time when you once again watch Brad work.